Welcome everyone. My name is Madeline No and I'm with NetHope. We want to welcome you to another NetHope Solutions Center webinar. Today our topic is supporting farmers with low-cost digital tools during COVID-19. Today we have presenters from the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, from eProd Solutions, and from Precision Agriculture for Development. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few of our housekeeping guidelines for today's session. We would like you to keep this an interactive session. Please put any of your comments or questions in the chat room and we will go over those during the Q&A session toward the end of our hour today. Please look for a follow-up email with a link to the recording for this session and the link to the slides and any other links to information that's relevant to today's session. And we do hope that you will answer our webinar satisfaction poll that will be presented after the webinar is over. We appreciate your feedback and it helps us make these sessions even better every time. And with that, I will turn it over to Sonia Rutzel from Catholic Relief Services.
Thank you very much, Madeline, and very much thank you, NetHope, for facilitating this webinar for us. I'm with the ICT4D Conference, and this is part of our online series. Today we'll be looking at supporting farmers with low-cost digital tools during the COVID pandemic. We have assembled a diverse speaker panel for you to share examples of using mobile technologies and lessons learned in assisting smallholder farmers under these unprecedented times. Our speakers include Ram Dupala, the theme leader at Digital Agriculture and Use for Innovation Systems for the Dry Lands at ICRISAT, that's the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics. Anna Hoot, the Client Relationship Manager at eProd Solutions. Jonathan Lee, the Chief Development Officer and Director for New Programs at Precision Agriculture for Development. And Dr. Anthony Whitbread, the Research Program Director, Innovation Systems for the Drylands and Country Representative of Tanzania, also from ICRISAT. So thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insights. We will have 3 short presentations, and please, if you have any questions for the speakers, place those in the chat room. We will have plenty of time for Q&A and discussion afterwards. So without further ado, I'd like to pass on to our first speaker, which will be Ram from ICRISAT. So Ram, over to you. Thank you.
Sure. Am I audible, Sonia? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Sonia. Thank you all the participants who are attending from all parts of the world. So this is the topic that I'm presenting on, supporting farmers with low-cost digital tools. My name is Ram Dulipala and I lead the Digital Agriculture and Youth Research team at ICRISAT. And what I'd like to do is give you some examples, some real world examples as to how digital technologies are being adapted by farmers and society and the civil society organizations to help agriculture cope with this unprecedented crisis at hand. So without wasting much time, can I just go to my next slide, please? Okay, so one of the first thematic areas where digital is actually playing out in a very big way is, of course, extension. All of us are aware that the traditional extension models, which are dependent on field visits and workshops, have a greater propensity for gathering of people. Not only that, but traditional extension has always had these issues of being very, very expensive as well. So e-extension has been coming about in various ways over the last few years. Like some of the new channels, new digital channels that have really aided the e-extension are, of course, mobile, television, and social media. E-extension offers convenience to the farmer and also has the potential of offering a lot of contextualization. I'm sure a lot of our participants would be aware that a challenge with the traditional extension is it's very generic and it has very little potential for really mass customization. Whereas the advantage of using digital channels, especially technologies like mobile apps, is that you can really offer that last mile contextualization at a very large scale. But I would like to highlight the point that I made in bold, which is e-extension really offers the potential to blend scientific and local indigenous knowledge at scale. I think that is the real differentiator of e-extension. Having commented on that, the current situation with e-extension is mostly there are a lot of e-extension pilots that are being carried out, but most of them are experimental and mostly at a pilot stage. But I think the COVID crisis has really probably has given us enough thrust to really mainstream e-extension in a very big way. Of course, this is not to undermine the challenges that a lot of e-extension projects are kind of throwing at us. There is a need for a lot of human capacitation all along the extension value chain. When we think about capacity building, very often we think about capacity building of the farmers, but we do, our research does suggest that human capacitations at all along the extension value chain is pretty much needed for e-extension to really deliver on its promise. Couple of examples that ICRISAT is very closely engaged with. In India, we run an extension platform called the Intelligent Systems Advisory Tool, using which we are offering extension services to 8,000 farmers, which are weather-linked agro-meteorological advisories. Very recently, due to the crisis, we actually set up an extension system for the Accelerated Value Chain Development Project in Kenya, using which we are actually servicing about 20,000 farmers. Can we move to my next slide, please? Another big thematic area that is being impacted in a digital, using digital technologies is, of course, the input value chains. Globally, though, most governments have taken utmost care to, exempt agricultural activities from all kinds of lockdowns, but what is being noticed is somehow the input value chains are also, experiencing some kind of issues. So this is where I think, again, new self-service apps or agent-led e-commerce models for seeds, fertilizers, etc., or digitalization of the existing value chains is being uptaken in a big way. Now, the advantage of enhanced digital adoption is, of course, with digitalization comes the prospect of disintermediation of the input value chains. And of course, a consequence of that is a greater transparency. That is, farmers today have, or probably anybody in the ecosystem, have some kind of a digital trace on, where their seed or where their fertilizer is actually coming from, right? And another unintended consequence, which has a positive connotation, of course, is a datafication of the more informal input supply chains. Now, a net effect of the digitalization of the input value chains, of course, is it creates some kind of a digital trail of the spending patterns of the smallholder farmers, right? And this digital trail actually gives greater visibility to the institutional institutional finance players to understand the farmer behavior better, and offers greater prospects of bringing in financial inclusion. To the right, I actually have a post, I've just kept, very interestingly, very recently, Bayer tied up with an e-commerce input supply company called AgroStar to deliver products to farmers during the lockdown. I don't think that this is a very isolated instance. Probably in a few months, you will see a lot of these kinds of exciting partnerships where big input companies, big agrochemical companies will proactively start looking at some of these e-commerce companies to as a means to actually, ensure that their businesses are able to cope up with the COVID-induced challenges. Can we go to the next slide, please? Another big thematic area where digital is actually playing out in a big way is, of course, agriculture marketing. Coincidentally, the COVID lockdown in India coincided with our harvesting season, right? And a lot of farmers, as they were getting ready to harvest their produce, started experiencing, situations where the spot markets weren't functioning, or they were finding it challenging in terms of, finding a transporter to transport their commodity from the farm gate to the spot markets, and all kinds of challenges. This is where we have actually seen a lot of citizen-led innovation, especially simple communication tools like WhatsApp or Facebook have actually, are being used by citizens and farmers in a very big way, right? So and again, governments also, in light of the COVID challenges, are also, trying to reframe their policies wherein they are enabling farmers to start undertaking sale of their produce directly from the farm gate, right? So when policy and the whole marketing structure start changing that way, e-commerce and digital technologies again can play a very big role in terms of enabling market linkages directly from the farm gate through self-service apps or through agent-led models. Again, an important outcome of this transition to digital platforms is, of course, traceability and more assurance of food safety. But again, there are also challenges as far as adopting digital platforms for marketing are concerned. These are the challenges to do with grading, and trust is a very big factor as far as marketing of agriculture produce is concerned, especially for those food systems where intermediation has been there for a very long time. Suddenly replacing digital channels with suddenly replacing human agents with digital channels, we might find some challenges in terms of instilling the trust with the farmers. But of course, some of those challenges can be overcome with the right mix of policies and right mix of human and digital interfaces. Finally, just like the input value chains, I also believe that the digital trail left by marketing agriculture commodities from farm to fork will also have a consequence on leading to better financial inclusion, because again, institutional financial actors will have better data to really understand the income patterns of the farmers. These are a couple of two examples from India where people have very intelligently used WhatsApp and Twitter to actually establish their markets when the spot markets actually collapsed. Can we go to the next slide, please? Another big thematic area where I think digital will play out in a very big way is peer-to-peer collaboration, and in bringing the elements of sharing economy to agriculture, right? We all know that collectivization of farmers is an effective collectivization of smallholder farmers is very essential step in transitioning from subsistence agriculture to a more prosperous agriculture. But collectivization of farmers brings with it its own challenges in terms of management, in terms of governance, in terms of transaction costs. That is where digital tools can actually act as very effective management systems to ensure that collectivization of farmers does not lead to a burden to the farmers, right? And innovations around collectivization can range from knowledge sharing to virtual aggregation of produce. And again, in terms of sharing economy in India, especially, we are seeing a rapid emergence of a lot of farmers, small scale farmers using drones, especially for activities like spraying, etc., etc. This is emerging in small clusters, especially in those places where farmers are seeing that suddenly their informal labor markets have disappeared and they do not have the manual labor for them to undertake activities like spraying or harvesting. That's where we are seeing the emergence of our online market players, marketplaces which are offering services like mechanizations, like tractors, etc., etc. And very recently, an important development is Government of India has also launched a small an application called Krishi Rath, wherein it is trying to use online platforms to help farmers discover transportation services. Because another big outcome of this lockdown is suddenly farmers are not finding sufficient transporters to move their farmers to move their produce from farm to the fork, right? So this is another big thematic area where digital is playing out. And finally, I would like to conclude with some important learnings. Can we move to my next slide, please? Yeah, so these are the key learnings, based on a quick analysis. These are some of the cross-cutting learnings that I would like to highlight. In digitalization of agriculture, I think it's important to take an information systems approach vis-a-vis a information technology approach, right? Along with thinking about digital solutions, it's also important to think in terms of the people, in terms of the process, and in terms of the technology. This is one very essential learning that we have observed from all the primary and secondary research that we have undertaken. Second big theme, point that I would like to highlight is, I really like the statement from a gentleman called Yuri Levine, who was the founder of a startup called Wade. He said, fall in love with the problem and not the solution. The challenge with most of the digital ag tech startups is these are mostly enterprises that are come from technologies who are trying to dabble in agriculture, right? And the real danger when someone with a technology background tries to, create something for agriculture is a lot of times you take a very technology centric approach to agriculture. I think it's important to flip that question and really fall in love with the problem and really have a deeper understanding of the context rather than trying to take a technology centric approach to the solution. Third is it's important to keep your solution simple, but at the same time not to really think in terms of simplistic ways, right? What I mean by that is digital solutions or digital interventions should be mindful of the social and environmental context in which they operate, right? All along, I'm sure all of you have encountered that there is a challenge in terms of adoption of digital tools and technologies. I think the real solution or the real answer to that is trying to really design your digital interventions to be more aware of the social and environmental context in which farmers operate. And I think solutions that use some of these elements in their design have a better uptake. Rapid iterations and prototyping backed by evidence and feedback. This is very, very important. And I do think that there is a policy implication as far as this is concerned. I think globally governments and, policymakers need to create some kind of, institutions wherein startups can engage with farmers, with their last mile customers, and engage in rapid prototyping and iterations. Finally, last but not the least, I do think that we should never undermine the human and institutional capacities. They are equal, if not more important, right? Globally, our evidence from our research suggests that digital interventions play a catalytic role when the analog complements, that is the grassroots institutions, the human capacities are already entrenched, and they really have a multiplier effect. So these are some quick learnings that I'd like to share with you, and that was my last slide. Thanks a lot for listening to my talk.
Thank you very much, Ram, for your insightful overview and all these practical examples. I'd like to mention that we will share those slides afterwards with the participants, so no need to take notes. And that leaves me now moving from India to Kenya, where our next speaker is based. It's Erna Hoot from eProd System, sharing how they are adjusting their supply chain management system during the COVID pandemic. Erna, over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sonia, and thank you for this opportunity to speak during this webinar. So good afternoon, at least here in Kenya. My name is Erna Gout, and I am the Client Relations Manager at eProd Solutions. Today, I will be sharing the experience of eProd on how to work remotely with farmers during COVID-19, and more specifically on how technology can contribute to strengthening agricultural food chains. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let me first briefly explain what eProd solution does. Sorry, can you go one back? Yes, thank you. So let me first briefly explain eProd. So we offer an ERP to manage agricultural supply chains. So our clients are typically commodity traders, food processors, or farmer cooperatives. Simply any kind of company that works with a large number of small-scale farmers. Our clients use eProd to manage their supply chain, from farmer registration to contracting of farmers, to field inspections, to payments, and much more. As a company, we are based in Kenya, as mentioned by Sonia as well. However, we serve clients throughout sub-Saharan Africa, so Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Ethiopia, but also in Afghanistan and Guatemala, where we recently started with a fully online implementation. We are currently active in over 20 value chains, such as grains, pulses, crops, nuts, coffee, cotton, you name it, and we can configure the system for that. So we aim to offer an affordable solution at 50 USD dollar cents per farmer per year. So we really aim to target the lower end of the market. Next slide, please. Now onto our topic of today, how to work remotely with farmers during COVID-19. So over the past 2 months, we have been in close contact, of course, with each of our clients to follow up on their daily struggles. From our conversations with them, we have learned that most companies seem to struggle with either one or all of these 4 challenges. First of all, how to keep collecting quality farmer data. Due to COVID-19, there are often travel restrictions in place, making it impossible for office staff to conduct field visits and meet with farmers. However, in many cases, field officers and/or lead farmers are still able to move freely within their region. Second challenge we have identified is to gather reliable production and survey data from farmers. So it's difficult for companies to know what is actually going on in the field. For example, have farmers planted? And if so, how are their crops doing? Are their inputs purchased? So seeds, fertilizers, and are they applied properly? Again, it's very difficult for office staff to follow up on this, but field staff can in many instances still meet with farmers. Now the challenge here becomes how to share this information back to the office. Third challenge we have identified is how to share information with farmers. So for example, how to share information on market prices, buying days, extension services, or simply share information on how to stay safe during this pandemic. The last challenge we have identified is COVID-19 restrictions have disrupted food systems worldwide and have resulted in cash flow constraints throughout the entire agricultural sector. From the farmer not being able to buy inputs to the trader not being able to sell their product. So in the upcoming slides, I will share our lessons learned for each of these 4 challenges. Next slide, please. So on the first challenge, how to collect quality data, due to the current crisis, it has become exceedingly difficult to conduct basic field operations, such as farmer registration. In order to keep working with farmers, companies need to know who these farmers are. They need to know their basic information, such as a name, phone number, date of birth, GPS location, payment information, etc. But they also need to know what they have planted in the field. So what is planted, what is the size of their plots, and in case of contract farming, has a contract been signed. And next slide, please. So eProd can assist to collect farmer information via local field officers and lead farmers. With a simple mobile application, farmer profiles can be registered in the field and then shared back to the head office for approval. So in this slide, you see on the right hand, you see a mobile application where a farmer profile is registered. You see, for example, a GPS location is captured. And then this is synchronized back to the office, where the location of the farmer is visualized on a map. And this will allow companies to keep building their farmer database, even during COVID-19. Next slide, please. The second challenge is gather reliable production and survey data. So gathering reliable data from the field to monitor production has become very difficult, and companies are often in the dark regarding crop status and projecting their yields. Next slide, please. So what eProd can do is it can assist in this through field surveys via local field staff and lead farmers. So in the office, on a back office application, which runs on a computer, inspection surveys can be assigned to field staff, which will then be sent to their mobile applications in the field. In the field, they can even offline conduct the surveys and then share this information back to a central database, which is monitored in the office. This allows companies to monitor field activities remotely and to ensure that production is still meeting the necessary certification standards. Next slide, please. Now, the third challenge is how to share information with farmers. So how to share information on extension services, market prices, or simply provide updates on COVID-19. With eProd, messages can be shared with farmers through SMS, which allows companies to communicate easily and effectively with farmers. Next slide, please. So in this slide, you see a specific example of sharing information with farmers. In this example, you see a weather forecast. Now we've done this through smart integration with strategic partners. In this case, an integration with an American company called Aware. And through their platform, we send out weather forecasts, but also yield forecasting, pest and disease alerts, any kind of information that Aware offers. Next slide, please. Then finally, the fourth and probably the most crippling challenge is the lack of cash liquidity in the whole sector. Farmers are cash constrained and less likely to invest in inputs, fertilizers, or other farming activities, and are thus often delaying planting. At the same time, buyers are struggling to sell their produce as export has come to a standstill and prices have dropped significantly. eProd can contribute to this by making the chain more efficient and therefore reduce costs. Through mobile money integrations, farmers can be paid remotely and against low transaction costs. To ensure cash flow in the field is restored, farmers need credit. However, financial institutions are not able to link up with farmers directly as they are unable to assess their creditworthiness. eProd can assist in this by de-risking farmers through sharing relevant information with financial institutions. Furthermore, eProd can also assist in managing loan repayments. Next slide, please. So to conclude, COVID-19 has created many challenges in working remotely with farmers, of which I've just mentioned a few. However, every crisis also offers opportunities, and those buyers that are able to adapt quickly to the current situation will have a competitive advantage in the years to come. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Erna. And now I'd like to introduce you to Jonathan Leahy. He will be sharing some practical examples from Precision Agriculture for Development, how they are supporting farmers globally with low-cost digital tools during COVID-19. So Jonathan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And thank you to all the participants and the ICT4D conference organizers for putting together this series of webinars. It's a pleasure to speak to you today about Precision Agriculture for Development and the work we're doing to support smallholder farmers around the globe with low-cost digital tools, especially in this current global pandemic. Next slide, please. Precision Agriculture for Development is a global nonprofit with operations in 8 countries in Africa and Asia. PAD was founded in 2016, growing out of research conducted by 2 Harvard professors, Michael Kramer working in Kenya and Sean Cole working in India, who independently came to similar results, that providing digital advice to farmers on their mobile phones could have a significant impact on their yields and incomes, and do so very cost effectively. Next slide, please. PAD's mission is to support smallholder farmers in developing countries to increase their yields and net incomes and advance environmental sustainability. Our vision is to achieve this by transforming the agricultural extension system, which is traditionally an in-person, face-to-face activity, and complementing it using digital technology, data science, and behavioral economics to provide customized and actionable information to smallholder farmers on their mobile phones. Next slide, please. To date, we have reached 3.6 million smallholder farmers across these 8 countries, and we've done this through several large partnerships with governments, nonprofits, social enterprises, and research organizations. Next slide. To respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, PAD is working to adapt and broaden our services to meet farmers' evolving needs. Smallholder farmers are particularly vulnerable to negative shocks associated with this pandemic. But we believe that digital information services are especially well placed to help farmers respond to the COVID pandemic. They do not require face-to-face contact with farmers or any other users, and they can be maintained or even expanded at a time when in-person services are impossible. They're highly scalable and can quickly reach a large number of people and do so cost effectively. Our average cost per farmer is roughly $1.55 per year. They enable two-way communication, which is critical, so that we can gather real-time data from farmers in addition to sending information to farmers. And this in turn allows us to provide content to farmers that is highly customized. It also allows us to use a user-centered design approach to ensure that these services are designed with users' needs in mind. A key part of PAD's work is continuously iterating and A/B testing to improve our digital information services over time, and quickly analyzing the real-time data that's available through these digital tools to generate evidence on the impact of these services, their optimal design, and what works and what doesn't. This is particularly needed in an emergency situation like now, when the reality on the ground is changing very rapidly. Next slide, please. So in the next few slides, I'm going to highlight a few of PAD's programs and how we've designed these digital information services and how we're adapting them to respond to COVID. In Kenya, PAD developed a two-way SMS platform called MOA Info in partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture. We originally launched this platform in July 2018 to respond to the devastating fall armyworm outbreak that was ravaging Kenya. We've since expanded the service to include comprehensive advice for 6 crops, including optimal farming practices, input recommendations, and pest and disease management. To date, 360,000 farmers have registered on this platform and accessed free agricultural advice. One of the first critical design decisions we had to make was whether to use SMS or voice. And in the Kenyan context, based on farmer focus groups and field testing, we selected SMS as the most effective option. Because this platform was originally designed to respond to an emergency outbreak, from the start, it was designed to collect two-way information from farmers, such as location, demographics, and real-time conditions on the ground, which has allowed us to customize and adapt content to respond to farmers' needs and address their misconceptions and information gaps. While traditional extension and many other in-person services for farmers have been disrupted in Kenya, MOA Info remains fully available and is now expanding to include 3 new crops. Next slide, please. In Uganda, we developed a voice-based service that provides digital advice to smallholder coffee farmers. For farmers who receive in-person training from TechnoServe and HRNS, PAD sends reminders about key farming practices to complement the in-person training. And for farmers that don't receive in-person training, PAD sends comprehensive advice via push calls. These farmers can also call into an automated Q&A hotline, record questions, and receive a pre-recorded answer from an agronomist, which provides us with critical feedback on what information is most needed by farmers. Due to the COVID lockdown, the in-person training in Uganda has been paused, but PAD has stepped in to provide comprehensive digital advice to the in-person group. And we've also adapted the service to provide COVID-19 advisory content based on official recommendations from Uganda's Ministry of Health. This includes topics such as description of the COVID-19 virus, common symptoms, how to avoid spreading it, and where to get more information. Next slide, please. In India, PAD is also adapting its digital services to respond to COVID. PAD provides outbound voice calls and an inbound IVR hotline to 830,000 farmers across 6 states in India. Our flagship program is in Odisha state, where we've reached roughly 700,000 farmers in partnership with the Department of Agriculture and Farmers Empowerment. During these last few months, when traditional extension has been suspended due to COVID, these services have remained open. They're continuing to add 40 to 50,000 farmers per month, and they're expanding to address several critical information gaps for farmers that are new. We've started sending several new types of information to respond to COVID-related market disruptions, including several types of crowdsourced information. These include which markets remain open, which crops are sold on which days, at what prices, which agricultural activities are exempt from lockdowns, what kind of organic inputs farmers can use while markets are inaccessible for their traditional inputs, how to store crops that cannot be sold at markets, and so forth. Next slide. So in crisis situations such as COVID, there are also major challenges gathering systematic and reliable data on the issues that rural populations are facing, making it very difficult to have effective policy responses. Because PAD has built and maintained a large database of farmers over the last several years, this provides us with a real-time feedback mechanism that has been critical to rapidly understand and respond to farmers' needs during the COVID pandemic. PAD's conducting a multi-country phone survey in Kenya, India, and Pakistan to understand the impact of the pandemic using call center operators who have been shifted to work from home. We're collecting data on a wide range of agricultural market disruptions, including farmers' access to markets to sell their crops or buy inputs or other products, food security, price changes, income loss, migration, and many other adverse events that farmers are facing now. In Kenya, in addition to surveying farmers, we're also surveying agri-dealers to understand where they're still operating. In Pakistan, where there's a somewhat unique situation where the extension system has not been completely closed, we're also collecting data on the impact of the lockdown on extension activities. In India, we're sharing reports on this data that we're gathering every week with our government partners. We're also collecting health-related data, including farmers' knowledge and perception of key public health messages, and farmers' adherence to recommended behaviors, such as hand washing and social distancing. Next slide, please. Looking ahead, PAD is working on several new digital tools that can be rapidly deployed to help farmers respond to these many market disruptions. Building our users' trust over the last few years during normal times has allowed us to quickly adapt to provide valuable new types of information and services. In Odisha, India, our live call center has become the main triage center being used to field farmers' queries related to the COVID lockdowns. We're working on new tools to create a vetted database of agri-dealers, output buyers, and other market intermediaries, and connect farmers with these intermediaries so that key services are not interrupted. We're also aggregating and disseminating crowdsourced market information to farmers, such as crop prices that are fluctuating more than usual. We're also expanding our services to include COVID-specific health information, such as disseminating public health campaigns on hand washing and social distancing. Crucially, the same user-centered design and A/B testing principles that we have always embedded in our services are especially important now in this rapidly changing context. A/B testing can be used to determine the optimal way to deliver public health messages to rural populations to maximize their influence on farmers' behavior. Next slide. So in conclusion, digital agricultural extension is a scalable, cost-effective solution to help farmers get access to information and is an important complement to traditional extension, even in the best of times when in-person extension is available but cannot reach all farmers. An emergency context like the current one, when traditional communication channels are impossible, is even more urgent to invest in low-cost digital tools to get farmers the information and the market linkages they need, to gather real-time information on the challenges on the ground and to adapt these tools for these new challenges. To maximize their impact on farmers' outcomes, these digital information tools should allow two-way communication. They should be designed with users' needs in mind and use continuous A/B testing and iteration with a real-time feedback mechanism to improve them over time. Investing in digital technology now will not only help farmers weather the COVID storm in the short term by supporting farmers' livelihoods and food security, but it can also catalyze the necessary transformation of the agriculture sector in the long term and support rural development long into the future. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion and questions, and please feel free to check out our website at precisionag.org for updates on our ongoing COVID-related work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. And thank you to all the presenters for your insightful examples. Now we're moving to our discussion round. We have already received a lot of questions, so thank you very much for this. Feel free to still keep them coming. My first question is for Anthony. Anthony, could you please let me know, given that the vast majority of smallholder farmers are not well integrated into input and output markets, do you think that the examples we have heard today are relevant to them?
Thanks, Sonia, for that question. And thanks for the three speakers. I think those were excellent talks and presenting different models of how the private sector, the kind of cooperation between the public sector and the private sector and startups are reaching farmers. Yeah, so your question is about the majority of farmers are really smallholders, and particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where I'm now living, many are disconnected from these input-output markets. And so digital agriculture, while it does have a big role to play, there's still a long way to go before we have, one, the types of hardware we need in the hands of farmers, and two, the kind of networks and the data availability that we would need to get farmers interacting through apps. And there's also that capacity development need as well. So the examples in India, I think, are a little bit different. You have great penetration of mobile phones and often smartphones. And you could see by the examples from PAD, incredible coverage in the state of Odisha, reaching more than 700,000 farmers. And often these are farmers that do have access to increasingly smartphones. So I think and they do have access to excellent data. So there are different contexts, but I would say in general, there's a long way to go to getting digital agriculture into the hands of a lot of the majority of the smallholder farmers that are resource poor. Thanks.
Thank you, Anthony. We also had a number of questions around data protection and data privacy. Erna, there were particular questions addressed to your presentation. So maybe I can ask you to answer first, but I would please also very much invite Ram and Jonathan to share your thoughts as well with regards to agricultural data in your programming. So Erna, the question was, how do you ensure personal privacy data protection for the farmers who has access to their GPS, biobanking information, etc.?
Yes, good question. Thank you, Sonia. So this is Erna again from eProd Solutions. So we actually don't work directly with the farmer. Instead, we work with the company that buys from the farmer. So this can be a processor, but it can also be a farmer cooperative, for example. So what we do is we offer a platform, which is based on a yearly license fee. And we offer that to the company themselves. We help them implement it, and then we set up a local database for them, not to become too technical. But this simply means that they manage their data, the data themselves. So we as eProd don't even have access to their data. We simply offer the platform to them. And then on the topic of data protection, this is something that's organized between the buying company and the farmer itself. And then, of course, in every country where we're active, we also look into the Data Protection Act that's there, especially when we set up a cloud-hosted database. We need to make sure that the data is safe. But we as eProd don't have direct access to it. That's in full control of the company.
Thank you. Any other comments around data protection?
Yeah, I could just jump in. This is Jonathan from Precision Agriculture for Development. So we, we're very careful not to share any of the farmer data that we collect with anyone else. We always have an opt-out option available to farmers to opt out of our services and to opt out of providing any information to us. For data that is sort of routinely collected, but just by virtue of farmers' participation in the service, data on whether they pick up our calls, whether they listen to our calls, that sort of routine data, that's encrypted and stored in a safe place and not shared with anyone else. Often we work with governments that have databases of farmers or likely farmers, people that have received input subsidies from the government in the past, or people that have received government transfers. And so we will often work with governments to reach out to farmers using their phone numbers that are in those databases. But we always ask for consent before asking any farmers questions, and they always have an opt-out so that they can opt out of our service and opt out of providing any information. I also want to briefly respond to some of the earlier questions about whether these types of services are relevant for very poor, very smallholder farmers. So all of our services are designed for farmers with simple phones, not smartphones. We use SMS, we use automated voice calls. So the most typical service that we run is where a farmer simply receives a voice call, picks it up, listens for 2 minutes, gets the information they need, and then hangs up. We have developed a mobile app that we're testing, but that's which would be used for smartphone users, but that's a very small percentage of our users. In most cases, in the countries that we work in, maybe 10 or 20% of farmers are smartphone users, but the majority of farmers have simple phones, which is all they need to access our services. And then we also rely heavily on peer learning, information sharing. So we will often encourage farmers that are enrolled in our service to also share the information that they're receiving with their neighbors, their community members that may not have a mobile phone. So for example, in Rwanda, which is the country that we work in, which has the lowest mobile penetration, and I think only about 60% of farmers there have any type of phone. We're relying more heavily on the information spillovers that come from peer learning.
Thank you, Jonathan. We also had a number of questions relating to digital inclusion and particular inclusion of persons with limited digital literacy. Maybe I can address this first to Ram and see if you have some comments on this. One particular question, for example, was use of radio or other ways to reach farmers with limited digital literacy.
Yeah, thanks, Sonia. Yeah, I'm all for it. I mean, I do think I think there is a need for pluralistic channels in the sense that you need to have mechanisms in place to kind of centralize the content, but have the ability to distribute it across different channels. And also, kind of customize the content as per the form factors available with the devices, right? What I mean to say is you should be able to distribute the content across radio, across mobile, in the form of a text message or a app, or across a television as well. No doubt about it, the more diversity in terms of the channel, the more will be the inclusion. But I'd also like to, answer one specific question in terms of, how do you really bring in people who are digitally challenged into the digital economies, right? I think that is where this innovation of an agent-led model, I think, is a very critical innovation, right? If you see a lot of startups, a lot of businesses that are into digital agriculture are really pivoting around, having some kind of agents on the ground, trained agents on the ground. And it is these agents, these agents typically will be young people from the community who have access to the digital applications, and they are the face of the company in terms of interfacing with the local community, in terms of sourcing orders or in terms of fulfillment of the orders, right? This little innovation, a small tweak in the business model, it addresses a number of concerns, especially with respect to issues around trust, because a lot of digital agtech startups encounter this issue of trust. How do you wean away a farmer from transacting with their traditional retailer and start transacting with a digital platform which probably has no human face, right? So I think this agent-led model is a very, very interesting pivot that probably will see a lot of evolution in the days to come.
Thank you, Ram. In this slide, could we please also address the, I guess, the gender gap, acknowledging that often female farmers will have less access or might be less able to use digital tools. Is this something, for example, at eProd Solutions, do you, is it something you have, I don't know, any lessons or any experience you like to share, and also like to extend that to Jonathan as well then?
Yes, thank you. So let me combine that with my response to Ram. So I fully agree that we need to focus on an agent-led system. So that's actually quite similar to what we do at eProd. So the mobile app is actually not used by the farmers directly, but instead it's used by extension service providers or field officers or agents, can be both. And then the farmers, to communicate to them, they would simply use a simple phone to receive either a text message or a voice message. And then on your question, how to include women in this. So in our experience, field officers are just as often women as men, maybe a little bit more men. But then again, when you go to the office of a farmer cooperative, for example, often it's the women that lead the EPROT implementation, because they simply, I don't know, from our experience, they simply pick up the system fastest. So in that sense, we've been actually quite lucky in including women into our value chains.
And I'll respond to those last two questions as well. So the gender gap is indeed a major challenge. I think if we took no proactive steps to addressing female participation in our services, only about 10 to 15% of our users would be women. So we've done a number of things to try to improve that. So for one thing, we've designed agricultural content that's specifically designed for women. So for example, in India, dairy is a value chain where women are more likely to have decision-making power in the household. And so we've designed content specifically for dairy to address female users' needs. Same thing with horticulture for the kitchen gardens that female farmers will often be managing in the household. We've also tried to target self-help groups with our content and try to get female users to refer other women in their communities or in their families. So through a combination of farmer referrals and working with self-help groups, in India, for example, we've managed to improve that female participation rate quite a bit. And then on the topic of digital literacy, I would just say, this is where it goes back to A/B testing and constant iteration to try to get the ease of use of these services down as low as it can possibly go. So, any obstacles to using the system are going to prevent users from getting the content they need. So, if there is any registration process, make that as simple as possible. If there's an IVR menu that farmers have to navigate, we do constant testing to make that menu as simple as possible. There are still going to be some users that don't know how to use a phone at all, and so any sort of menu, pressing buttons is going to be a challenge. But we try to just get that as simple as possible and look at the data to see what types of tweaks to the design help to improve farmers' usage and engagement with the service.
Thank you, Jonathan. My next question is for Anthony, and it's about the digital extension model. Actually, it's a combination of questions. So the first one is, how is the content developed in digital extension services? And maybe in this regard, you could also answer how digital extension services blend formal with farmers' knowledge, and maybe even see how this is potentially changing in the current scenario. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. Another hard question. Look, there's a real need to improve the traditional and underfunded role of the extension systems in most developing countries. And certainly digital agriculture will be central to any successful attempt to do that. But as we've heard, it's got to be interacting with that human interface. The extension officer is always going to remain as important as ever. You always need that trusted person in the field, connecting with the community, but they need to be supported through these, like you said, the knowledge management systems. And these haven't been developed to a large extent. We need to start providing through the national systems hardware that extension officers can get access to their tablets and information, knowledge management systems that bring together information, critical information on climate, on finance, on agronomy, on pests and diseases, on relevant topics that they're expected to provide knowledge to the farmers on. And we need to interact these with toolboxes. These could be apps like Plantex or Plant Village that recognize pests and diseases, or they could be agroclimatology type apps. So there's the world's, it's an incredible opportunity for us to bring this information systems together. I think I answered. What was the second part of your question, Sonia?
Sorry, how digital extension services blend formal with farmers' knowledge?
Yeah, look, yeah, of course, Indigenous knowledge and farmers adapt technologies better than researchers could ever hope to. So as usual, knowledge has to be integrated with farmer knowledge and adapted to the situation. Yeah, so while the technical information is there and it can be made more accessible through tablets, that's why you need local expertise, local human interface to bring this technical knowledge and farmer knowledge together. So I think my point is that it's not ever going to be just digital. It's always going to have that human element to it. Thanks.
Thank you, Anthony. And speaking about, I guess, crowdsourced knowledge and information, Jonathan, this question was for you. How do you ensure that the information you're crowdsourcing is reliable?
Sure. So, I mean, I think, you know, we're not relying on any one individual data point, you know, on things like, you know, whether a market is open or, you know, what the going price is for a crop. You know, we're sort of relying on the law of large numbers to, you know, to gather data from a lot of different sources and then, you know, triangulate it to make sure that that the data that we have is accurate. We're not, you know, passing on any single one data point.
Thank you very much. And my last question is for Ram. How do you see partnerships changing, particularly now with regards to the current situation? Is there any sort of final thoughts you might like to share?
Yeah, I mean, even before the crisis, I think we were all underscoring the importance of partnerships because the digital economies have a radically different economic structure vis-a-vis the traditional economic structure. The common example I would like to give you is most of us use Google, right? But who actually pays for it, right? So essentially, the digital economies have created this unique model where the beneficiary of a service and the payer of that service are essentially could be very different, right? What that actually leads to is a very different kind of a world in which partnerships are very, very important. But what I would like to also underscore is in terms of digitalization of agriculture, I think somehow, as Anthony underscored, it's very important to somehow bring in the national systems also into the fold here. Because it again goes back to the point that the success of your digital intervention is tied into, you know, the presence of very strong grassroots institutions. So essentially that definitely means, and in most developed or developing countries, inevitably it is the governments which have these grassroots institutions, be it in the form of a cooperative or be it in the form of an extension, right? So it's I know it's a very difficult task in terms of, you know, really advocating technology adoption or digitalization to governments, but the chances of really succeeding by really co-opting governments into your digital interventions will enhance our chances of success, right? So definitely, I think convening a wide array of partners is definitely the way to go. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much, and I think that's also a fantastic comment to close this webinar. I thank very much all our speakers and also NetHope for facilitating us, and for everybody for attending and all your questions. I know we only got through very few of those, but we will aim to answer a few offline. We will convene again on this platform on June 9th when we were talking about user-centric design during the current pandemic. Yeah, thank you very much. Have a nice rest of your day. Goodbye. Oh, and please do fill out the feedback form when you log off. We would love to hear your comments and any advice for us how to improve those webinars. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending today's session. As Sonia mentioned, please take a moment to fill out our satisfaction poll. We would love to have your feedback. And please look out for that follow-up email with links to the recording and to the other collateral from today's session. Thanks again and have a great rest of your day.